Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have a personal interest in this because I knew Katrina when she was a professional tennis player, and I've known June as a colleague and a friend for many years. I'm just going to quickly give a thumbnail for each of them, and then we'll dive right in. Our moderator today is Quorum board member June Archer. She's a C-suite executive and visionary growth driver. She's a prolific public speaker, and she's a board member, mentor, and coach. Our guest today is Katrina Adams, a woman of many firsts, the first African-American to lead the United States Tennis Association, also known as the USTA, the first two-term chairman and president of the USTA, and the first former player to hold that honor. She's also the author of Own the Arena. It's her new book, and she'll be speaking about that with us today. So June, take it away.
Thank you, Marta. And I have to thank Meg as well for inviting me to do this with Katrina. It's great to see you again. So let's just get into this, right? But before we start talking about your story and upcoming book, Katrina, I want to acknowledge your longstanding commitment to racial and gender equality in sports. You've been a true champion. You are currently the executive director of Harlem Junior Tennis and Education Program. You're the chair of the ITF's Gender Equality and Tennis Committee. And the Advantage All campaign started under your tutelage when you were the USTA president, chairman, and CEO. In the wake of the George Floyd murder and the subsequent protests against racism, you published an article on June 11th with the title, "Don't Cheer for Me on the Court if you won't cheer for me off court." Can you tell us a little bit about what impact you'd like to make with this article?
Absolutely, but first just let me say thank you all for having me and tuning in today to listen to this hopefully exciting chat, and I look forward to hearing from you all. And June, thank you for that question. You know, when you're in my shoes, I just wrote a book, Own the Arena, Making a Difference and Succeeding as the Only One. And the only one really refers to either the only woman or the only African-American in the room. And, you know, in the wake of what has happened here in America and the current events as to what we've seen, I had to start reflecting on my career and what that means and the experiences that I've had. And too often as athletes in particular, you know, everyone's cheering for us on the court, you know, they're excited, they want us to win and they applaud us. As long as we're on the court. And then when we come off the court and walking by, you act like we're invisible, or you're treating us very different, and you won't support us equally as individuals of color off the court as much as you support us on the court. So that's really what the impetus of that article was about, and to really just talk about, you know, I'm not just here in America, I'm global. I'm all over the place. I'm on television often. And taking the dais and platforms for so many organizations. And it's just very important that I want you to respect me for my intellect, my knowledge, the expertise that I have in my field, and really respect me, not just when I'm on television or in forums like this speaking, but if I walk by you on the street and I'm not dressed up or looking like the person that you saw maybe the day before, that you don't treat me any different.
Well, I can appreciate that. So I do really want to acknowledge that you put yourself out there with your point of view. And for our audience, if you haven't had a chance to read that article, I recommend that you do after our chat today. I also want to talk a little bit about something fairly personal. Earlier in the year, you were affected by the coronavirus. You were ill yourself. And with all the credible statistics, we know that the Black community is disproportionately impacted by this. Do you have any perspective on this data? And also, might you have a perspective around how survivors can contribute to the fight against COVID-19?
Yes, I was very lucky that I had a minor case of COVID-19, but nevertheless I had it. I only had body aches for a couple of nights. Obviously had a fever one night as I woke up in a cold sweat, was able to get tested, and and I was positive. So, the self-quarantine actually works, staying away from people and making sure that you're washing your hands, etc. But, I always say things happen for a reason. So for me, I've been able to donate plasma. My antibodies are extremely high, and I've been able to donate plasma a couple times, and I have a couple more appointments coming up, hopefully where I'm able to save 3 or 4 lives with each time that I go. But it's so important as we see that it's on the rise again in other parts of America right now, that we're vigilant and diligent in how we're taking care of ourselves and protecting one another, because, it's a silent killer out there, and we have to be mindful and respectful for all.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're healthy, and obviously you're here with us today. So, so let's change courts, as it were, and let's get to the upcoming book. And the title of your book is Own the Arena, Getting Ahead, Making a Difference, and Succeeding as the Only One. So your tenure as president and CEO of the USTA ended in 2018. And just from our couple of conversations, you're very active, you have a demanding schedule. I'm curious, what is it that inspired you to actually write this book?
Well, it's very interesting. It's people were telling me that I needed to write a book, more so than me wanting to write the book. But after reflecting and giving it much thought, I thought it would be a great tool for people to understand what it's like to be in my shoes, understand what it's like to first come from a sport like tennis, a sport that's for everyone. I was very fortunate to stumble upon the sport at a very early age and be successful, but also to be able to understand the nuances of the business side of tennis. And so when you read the book, you'll read about some current events or recent events, and then there'll be some reflection as to what I've learned in my life through the sport that has prepared me for multiple situations that I've been in. But even more so, I think the experiences that I've had as a Black woman and as a woman, period, in many situations, hopefully some of the takeaways that I've provided for each of you in the book will help you overcome perhaps some obstacles in your own life, in your own professional life, and perhaps give you confidence in other areas that you may have felt a little short on.
Well, let's dive into that confidence piece, because your title is interesting and it ends with succeeding as the only one. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, it's really about, when you're the only woman in the room, people are viewing you differently, or maybe listening to you differently. Or if you're the only person of color in the room, there may be a different expectation or some preconceived notions about your ability and your knowledge of your profession and being prepared for the meeting. And so, I remember a time in a meeting where I was the only female in the meeting. It was the first time I joined this particular board. And we were having a conversation, and at the end of it, one of the gentlemen, long-term board members, said, thank you for sharing your wisdom. I would have never looked at it that way. And I said, of course not. You're not a woman. So everybody in the room laughed, and it made them start to think differently, because of course, you have to have diversity of thought in the room, and being a woman and a woman of color, it brings a lot of diversity of thought from a different point of view than just our male counterparts would have in the room. And that's really where that only one is coming from.
Do you hear from other women that they're experiencing this onlyness? Because I can relate to you and this idea. Throughout my life, I've been the only whatever, pick it, woman, Black woman, combination of things. And that sense of the only can be overwhelming at times, but it can also be empowering. So I wanted to tease a little bit more out around what you said there with someone who actually encouraged you, because that encouragement, I think, is key, because you don't often get it. And as an only, you might retreat versus leaning forward. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I really look at it as, I don't like really referring to it as the only one. Maybe it's the first one, But when you're the only one, that means there's no room for someone else. And I think it's our duty and responsibility to make sure that we're able to bring someone else along with us that looks like us, whether it's another woman, another person of color, or whatever that other only would be at that time. Because if we don't, then we're not really sharing the wealth and the opportunities that are there. And so, yes, it can be lonely at times, but that's why it's important to make sure that you have a village that you are surrounding yourselves with, or a network that you're able to lean on in times of perhaps desperation or looking for answers. Because perhaps in that room, in that space, in that office, you don't feel like you have someone else that you can trust, because you don't have other like minds that are in your space. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you're building that network, building that village around you, that you can pick up the phone or be with someone and lean on and have those deeper conversations.
Yeah, it's like having a bit of your own board of advisors, right?
Well, I call it my personal board. I reference that in the book. And, that personal board are people that have the expertise levels of maybe that's outside of yours, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's finance, whether it's marketing, whatever it is that you need a little more intel on that's going to help you succeed in your position. You want to surround yourself with those people, and those people are only there to provide you that support. They want nothing else in return, but it's really your way of making sure that you have the right people around you that are there to continue to lift you up and continue to provide those opportunities for you to succeed.
So I'm curious, you took on writing a book, right? And there's all of this idea around writing a book is really tough, and then you hear, oh, everyone has at least one book in them. So very briefly, what was the process like for you just to tackle writing a book?
Well, I cheated a little bit because I do have a ghostwriter, someone that I collaborated with often, and to really, when it comes to the English language, you want to make sure that you have it right. So, I had a book agent that I worked with that helped me identify multiple ghostwriters, of which I interviewed. I wanted to make sure there was someone that I felt understood my personality, understood where I was coming from. And, we did a ton of interviews of many people that I crossed paths with throughout my life to be able to collaborate the story and bring it together. And so, my responsibility obviously was giving my own story, my own testimony, whether it was verbal, recorded, whether it was in writing, of me just writing, with things that I would think about. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a thought, and I'm jotting it down to make sure that I could remember it the following morning to expound on it, and then share those stories, ideas, and conversations with the ghostwriter, and then collectively and collaboratively, we came up with the final product.
Okay. Well, at least we've gotten a little bit of a behind the scenes and how that worked for you. All right. So I know that everybody's champing at the bit, right, to hear about, hopefully, what most of us are aware. So in 2018, the US Open women's singles final, right? It was between Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka. It was also your last women's single final as the leader of the USTA. So there were a lot of things going on in this moment. And if you're not familiar with the moment, it was very interesting. In fact, it was a very different experience in tennis. And so the incident sort of blazed through the media with a lot of different perspectives. So let's just start with Katrina. What happened?
Well, when you buy the book, it's in the first chapter of the book. But yeah, it was a very interesting and surreal experience, if you will. I mean, it was a situation where I wouldn't wish it on anyone, in understanding where turn of events occurred in the match, where Serena was upset and really tried to fight her fight against what had transpired. Part of it was, I understood, and then the other part was where I think she just kind of let her emotions take over and her passion and went off on a tantrum on another area. But, you know, at the end of the day, as far as the rules and code of conduct is concerned within the Grand Slam rules, the chair umpire followed the rules. Now, I just felt, and I think the world kind of felt, that the initial warning that was given, of which Serena was fighting against, could have been done silently, and both players could have received that and they could have carried on. But long story short, you know, the match is over. The boos have ensued. We walk out on the dais for the final trophy ceremony, and you know, Tom Rinaldi from ESPN says, you know, welcome to the United States, you know, tennis championship open, and blah 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 blah. And then you know, 20,000 people are booing again. And so in that moment, he says, oh, and here to present, you know, say a few words as the chairman, president, Katrina Adams. And I'm like, are you serious now? You want me to speak? So it was a moment of really trying to collect my thoughts, trying to keep a smile, trying to stay calm. Fortunately, I have some experience in media and being on television and with a mic in front of me. And it was one of those moments where you had a prepared speech, if you will, to kind of congratulate the women. And of course, you know, because of what just occurred, you're trying to make the best of the moment and congratulating both of them individually and recognizing what they mean to the sport. And in somewhere in my statement, I talked about the outcome of the match, that it wasn't what we were looking for, and referencing the turn of events that happened on the court, and then of course the booing that had ensued after that. And people took it, you know, personally, to say that I was talking about the outcome of the winner of the match. People said that I was biased and that, you know, I wanted Serena to win because she was Black. I said, well, did you look on the other side of the net and notice that the other young lady, Naomi Osaka, was also Black? So it was all these different things that kind of came about. You know, Twitter sphere went crazy, media went crazy, but, you know, as long as I know what I meant in my heart, and you know, I stood by it. I've had communications with both of the players, both Serena and Naomi, following that. And, you know, we've moved forward. We're, a couple years down the road, and now we're fighting another issue with trying to play the US Open in front of no fans.
Yeah. Well, you talked a bit about how you handled the media, but I am curious, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I'm a huge sports fan. I'm a dedicated tennis fan. I followed everything, and I felt like the media took a point of view and really ran. And so here you are, the first Black woman running the USTA in the history of the USTA. You have relationships with both players, as you've acknowledged. You're a former player, so you see it from their perspective. How did you manage that kerfuffle? I mean, that was a lot.
Well, I think the easiest thing in dealing with the media, I mean, the media's job is to try to get you twisted. I'm on the media side sometimes. So, you know, and they can literally pull one quote and pull it out of context and just really hone in on it, which is what happened with me with my statement. But again, if you know why you said something or what the underlying reasoning was, you stick to it and you move forward, because they can twist you, they can get you to say something that you don't want to say, and that's how I kind of dealt with it. But like you said, being a former player, I would never ever say anything, you know, totally against another player in that situation. I mean, Naomi had just won her first Grand Slam title, her first US Open title, and the entire atmosphere really took that away from her. She was overwhelmed, but not overwhelmed with joy. She was overwhelmed with sadness because she felt that people did not want her to win, which was really unfortunate. And those are the messages that I was really trying to get across to, you know, the ESPN and CBS and the other media outlets that ensued following that. And again, it's, you know, it's your own confidence into who you are and what you stand for and what you meant.
So with all of that having obviously come down, it has been a couple of years, and in you putting this book together, Are there any lessons for all of us that we can take away from that moment? I think for me, I saw perhaps the greatest female athlete of all time in the sport have a bit of a meltdown. I saw an up-and-comer who is amazing have her moment in terms of winning, and then all of these other things happen. So I'm just curious, with all that went on, are there some lessons for us just as people, and maybe as women in particular, that we might take away? And with your inside view, I'd love to know if you have any perspective on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, some of these things I do talk about in the book. I think it's important that you own your voice, you know, understand what it is that you're saying, why you're saying it, own your knowledge and your confidence, because if you're not prepared when you go into situations, you can get turned around, which is what the media will do. So for me, going into these interviews and these media outlets, you know, I knew my knowledge. I knew what I'd said. I knew why I'd said it. I knew the background for a lot of this stuff. So I could own it and I could speak to it and not be swayed away from it. And I think anytime you're put, when your back is against the wall in any situation, you know, if you're prepared, you're confident in your own voice, and knowing what it is that you're trying to accomplish, you can overcome anything and you can be successful.
All right. Well, that's a perfect segue, because I want to acknowledge that Meg Sullivan, who is Quorum's founder, has been working with her team this year to really focus content on this idea of how we shape the future, which, with everything going on right now, Meg, it makes you seem very much like the fortune teller. Katrina, what's your perspective on how women who feel they are the only one can grasp onto this concept of own your arena, shape your future? How would you give us some points or tips or ideas to take away around that?
Well, I think it's really important that when you are in that position in a leadership role and you're perhaps in the room with all men, you know, you have a seat at the table. So don't just accept the seat at the table, own your seat at the table. You're there for a reason. You're not there by chance. And if you do feel that you've been put in that position politically to be a token, if you will, you know, make sure that you're prepared, and that way you can own your voice, and that way you are setting an example for others. You set an example for the other men around you in the room to know that you are just as knowledgeable, if not smarter. Well, we're smarter, so yeah, that's true. But you're prepared, you know how to get the job done, you know how to put a team together and guide that team. We have to show that we're leaders at all costs. And unfortunately, too often we have to work twice as hard as our male counterparts to prove that. But that's okay, because in the end, we're going to overcome it. We will be that leader, and we will be able to say, I told you so. But when you're in that environment and you're trying to bring others along, we have to bring our other women along with us. We have to. We can't just continue to be the only one. And there's a lot of pressure with that. And I think too often we as women can be catty and not want to provide the tools and the template to our female counterparts because we don't want them to take our job. Well, if we're doing our job properly and at our best, we don't have to worry about the next person coming along taking it. And if someone is going to take our seat, it's because we let our guard down. We were not prepared. And we chose to just think that we're going to be in that seat forever. When in any position, any job, any title, there's always competition. And so that's the way you have to do it. You have to have your own guidelines and own parameters in place as to what will make you continue to be successful, continue to take you to the next level, even if you are in the C-suite. But also, how can I get other women to be promoted, not only in my division, but in other divisions, to now be my counterpart in the C-suite.
Thank you. Well, I hate to do it, but I have to share you with the rest of the audience. And we've been taking questions, and I hope that all of you put those into the chat. Marta is feeding them to me, so I'm looking off to my right here just to read them and acknowledge you sending them. So we're going to switch to questions. Please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to all of them. I promise we won't, but we'll try. Okay, Katrina, here we go. So the first one is, how did you go from the Pro Tour to the top of the USTA? Did you have a plan around that?
Great question. There was no plan initially. I mean, when I came off the tour, I was actually a national coach, working with our top juniors that were making the transition from the juniors to the pros. I then went off into commentating with Tennis Channel. I'd studied communications at Northwestern University, and I'd honestly gotten sick of being on the court. And so I was able to make that transition into commentating. And when you're in that world, you obviously are starting to learn a little more about business. But I became a volunteer at the USTA, sitting on a committee, and realized that I didn't really know who the USTA was. If you ladies are tennis players or ever competed growing up, you knew you played in a USTA tournament, you knew you had a USTA ranking, but I had no idea of the business of the USTA. And so I really got intrigued in understanding what their mission was, to promote and develop the growth of tennis here in America. And that is what inspired me to get more involved in the organization, because I then started to realize that many of the programs that I grew up with or grew up in were supported by the USTA. Many of the teams that I had competed on in the summer funded those teams for me to be able to travel to national tournaments and et cetera. So because I wanted to know more about the USTA, and as I got to know more over the years, it inspired me to say that I really wanted to be the leader of the organization, to be able to share my experiences, someone who's come through every level of the sport, and knew everyone in the business side of the industry. I've had relationships with somewhere down the road, that I could hopefully take the organization to another level. So it wasn't an initial thing. It wasn't something that I dreamed of a long time ago. It was kind of a happenstance.
So your background as a player somewhat prepared you for your role in the
Absolutely,
USTA.
because yes, being a player and taking note and understanding every facet of the game. When I became a professional, I was on the WTA tour. I always had some mentors that were on tour that were making sure that I understood the business side. I joined the board very early on the players, the WTA tour, and to really learn about the business side of the sport, to be respected by the other players, to be respected by the tournament directors, sponsors, media, etc. So when you start to put yourself in those arenas and you are learning more about it, you're preparing yourself for things that you don't really know are going to be there down the road.
We know that the equality in sports for women is a big issue. We've had the soccer ladies be very vocal about that. I know the professional basketball players are very vocal about that. What do you think the future of women in tennis is? Are we talking about equal prize money at any point in the future? How do you see that evolving?
Well, in the Grand Slam level, there is equal prize money at all 4 Grand Slams: the Australian Open, Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open was the first Grand Slam to offer equal prize money back in 1973, and Wimbledon was the last in 2012. So there is equality on the Grand Slam, which is the grandest stage and the most prize money for the sport. Now, when it comes to the WTA Tour and the ATP Tour, which is the men's tour, there are some inequities there when it comes to prize money, particularly when those 2 tournaments, if the tournament has both the men and women that aren't Grand Slams, and there's some prize money disparity for the men's tour and the women's tour, and that's mainly because their sponsors are different, their deals are different, and those are the tournaments that we're trying to get the tours to realize that just doesn't look good at the end of the tournament when the male is getting 30% more in prize money than the female is, or 20% more, whatever the disparity may be, and trying to make sure that the sponsors can really come to those tournaments equally to do that. Now, Can it happen? It can definitely happen. Are we a year away from it? I would love to think so, because we've been talking about this for quite some time. So in one level, yeah, tennis is equal when it comes to the prize money for Grand Slams, but it's not when it comes to the WTA Tour and the ATP Tour, where the sponsorship is just completely different into what they have to offer their players. And you look, as you talked about with the women's soccer and hockey and all the other sports that, WNBA, they're all fighting for equality. And it's not that they want more, they just want to be able to get paid the same that their male counterparts are for the output that they're equally giving to their sports.
I think this whole issue has given the fans a deeper understanding of what you mentioned earlier, is the business of the sport and the business of sports. Because as fans, we don't necessarily understand the varying level of sponsors, how that can really shape what prize money and other things that athletes have access to. So I think the more we understand that as fans, and the more the business of sports opens us to appreciating how these various sports work, I think you'll have support from fans. I'll put my fist up and definitely get in that fight, because it's very worthwhile. So let's switch to a couple of questions about the book. Everyone wants to know, when can they get it?
Yeah, well, I would have loved to told you that you could get it in a couple weeks. It was actually due to come out in July, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, everything kind of got pushed back. There are no books leaving the warehouse that are being sold from people not traveling in recent months. So it will now come out February 23rd, 2021. It is available for pre-sale. You can go to Amazon or HarperCollins publishing.com or Apple Books and buy the book. I think a link will be provided for you. But the more I can get my pre-sales up, the better chance it has of coming out as being a bestseller. So hopefully you all will get your copy. And there will also be an audio version down the road, hopefully with my voice as well.
That would be great. How long did it take you to write it, Katrina?
It took a year. Definitely took a year to do, from the moment we started talking about it to the end. So I would say we started really putting pen to paper in October of 2018 or November 2018, and finished it at the end of this past year.
Was there anything surprising that you learned about yourself when you went through that process? You often hear authors say, wow, I discovered this about myself or that about myself.
Yeah, I think one of the things, not to toot my own horn, is that I just didn't realize how much I had accomplished, or all the things that I had done through my life that actually people cared about. Everything that I do is to try to make a difference, no matter what board I'm on or what committee I'm on. It's really, and I don't really go on any platforms that I don't really care about or that I can't promote and really talk about wholeheartedly. So it really made me kind of digress and think about what's truly important to me, about the values that have been instilled in me by my parents, and how I really kind of carried what they had put in me forward to represent our family.
So people are interested in your personal board. So they want to hear more about how you identify people. How do you figure out who you want to invite into your circle and the kinds of qualities that you look for in people?
Well, when you talk about your personal board, I mean, my personal board consists of friends. And these are friends that I've either known for a very long time or not so long time, but who have a shared interest in wanting to see me succeed, understanding what my challenges are, understanding what I'm a person to say I know what I don't know. And so because I don't know certain things, or I'm not as skilled in certain areas, those friends that have that skill set, it was very easy for me to reach out and say, hey, can you explain this to me? Or can you guide me onto how I can be more knowledgeable in this area, so forth and so on. And these are people that don't want anything from you, but for you to be the best person that you can be. So that's really how I put my personal board together. It can be, I've got someone that I've known for 30 years on there. I have someone that I've known for 15, 20, maybe 5 years. But you know who those people are that you can truly lean on, and you want people that are going to tell you no. You don't want people that are just going to yes ma'am you or yes sir you throughout this. This is about making sure that you have what it takes to succeed and get to the next level, or to make sure that your arena has all the information that it needs to thrive.
Mm-hmm. There's some interesting questions about younger tennis players coming up through the sport. So I'm going to start with a larger question about how the sport has changed, and what's your perspective on how younger players are being managed and trained and coached with all of these fairly pricey and I would say exclusive kinds of resources. Some parents may seem to be pushing their kids in the interest of the parents versus the interest of, okay, so you're smiling, so you understand what that's about. And there's a general interest in what your point of view is about how tennis has changed as it's become more of a business. That's a big question. So
No, I
you
got
want me
it.
to,
So
yeah.
I'll start with the parenting, because I think it's important as parents. It's the responsibility of the parent to introduce different activities, different sports to their children. One, for the fun of it; two, for the exercise of it; and three, as they get better, for the competitive side of it. And tennis in particular is one of those sports that the life skills that you're learning at a very young age are carried with you throughout your life and into business. Tennis teaches you self-discipline, self-confidence, how to build your self-esteem, dealing with adversity, being disciplined, time management, etc. So it's a great sport to introduce your child. Now, I'll tell you a story. When I became a national coach, one of my first assignments was to go travel and work with this young lady, a 14-year-old who was a top player in the nation. And I say what she and her parents, and I'm having this conversation about, it's how honored I am to be able to work with this person. And I said, too often you have parents that are pushing their kids because the parents miss that boat or opportunity themselves. And so therefore they put way too much into their kids, or too much pressure on their kids, because they want them to succeed in a space where they didn't. And the father looked at me and said, we're those parents. And I was like, if I could just pull my foot out of my mouth, that commercial Southwest Want to Get Away? That was me. But too often we have that situation, and then you see these kids that as soon as they have an opportunity to say no at the age of 18, they throw their rackets away and they don't pick them up until they're 40 because they've just been burnt out. They didn't want to play it. On the flip side of it, you have kids that are very talented, and it's very important that you can continue to provide those opportunities for them. Our sport is not a cheap sport to compete in. It's a cheap sport to learn, to get started in, and to play for the first few years in your local community centers and parks and programs. But once you get on a national track of competition, obviously there's costs involved with travel, with hotel, with tournament fees, etc. And it's challenging for those parents that may not be financially wealthy to be able to do that, and they need support against the parents that do have the wherewithal and the finances to do that. So for parents, you've got to listen to your child. If your child is not having fun or really don't want to do it, don't look at it as your ticket to success, because you were the player, that player that wanted to be as good as your child or get the accolades and what have you. Tennis is on television 24/7 now, so everybody has this grandiose idea as to what it can be or what it can bring to their family or their child. Unlike me, I got to see it on the weekends every so often, or maybe only during Grand Slam season when I was a child, and I really wanted to play. My parents didn't play. I loved competing. I love competing in everything that I do, and which was really the impetus of my success, not only on the court, but off the court.
I want to build on a point you made about the sport being expensive once you get beyond that recreational level, I'll call it. Given that, how do we get more children of color into the sport? And obviously you're working on that with the program you run in Harlem. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the National Junior Tennis and Learning Network are over 200 chapters that are around the country, and I run one of them, the Harlem Junior Tennis and Education Program. And these programs are providing tennis and education to these youth in underrepresented communities. But one of the misnomers, and this is very important, is that not all kids of color are coming from underrepresented communities where they can't afford it. Blacks spend $1.3 trillion in America, and therefore there's a lot of money that's out there, and there are people that are actually can't afford to put their kids on these tracks. Now, unfortunately and fortunate, many of those well-to-do parents are making sure that the kid is going down the academic route, trying to get to the Ivy Leagues, etc. And they take their kids out of that competitive track at an early age, not allowing them to really fulfill the talent that they have. And I think that's the important thing, that we have to remember that not all Black kids or kids of color are underrepresented and can't afford the sport because they can. Now, having said that, those that aren't able to afford it, there are grant opportunities that are out there that provide resources for these families. But I know I was one of those. My parents were teachers. I'm one of three. My community helped support us. I had coaches that gave free lessons. I had community programs that raised money for me and my family to allow me to go and travel. So there are ways to find the finances necessary without just putting a hand out to the USTA, thinking that they're an ATM.
Okay. There's a real interest in you and what's next for you. You are involved in a number of things, and I think the audience would like to just hear a bit more about it. I read a bit of a list, but I don't know that I captured everything. So they're curious in what are the organizations you're involved in, and what do you look forward to in terms of your involvement in sports and the business of sports? What's next for Katrina?
So obviously I'm still involved in the USTA right now. I'm really kind of being, even though I'm on the board, I'm working as more of a consultant in our D&I issues right now, particularly in the wake of George Floyd. I think it's very important that you have that voice, or a voice like mine, that can help direct you and guide you in those areas. The same thing with the ITF. Being the chair of the Gender Equality and Tennis Committee, I think is huge in trying to get more women. It's not about getting more women on the court, it's getting more women on the business side of our sport, getting involved in the organizations, getting on committees, getting on boards, and finding themselves in the C-suite. I am a board member of RISE, which is the Ross Initiative for Sports Equality, which focuses on providing curriculums to high schools and colleges in regards to race and bigotry, and making sure that there are platforms out there to teach our kids how to not just embrace it, but to fight it. I'm also an advisory board of Athletes Unlimited, which is a new organization for a new women's professional league, which will have softball and volleyball to start. Their softball league starts in the end of August, goes through mid-September. It'll be based in one arena in the Chicago area. Obviously, the Harlem Dream Tennis and Education Program, which is near and dear to me because I grew up in a program like this in Chicago. So for me, it's all about fundraising for this program to provide the opportunities that are necessary both on the tennis court and in the classroom to provide not just champions in tennis, but champions in life. And I'm sure there's a few other things that I'm involved in, but that's just a handful to start.
Well, this is a big question, and I was sort of saving it because we could, I'm sure, spend more time on it than we wouldn't have gotten to some of the other questions. I mentioned to you last night that I was watching Real Sports, and the format was very much about reaching out and listening to people in sports, the athletes, the coaches, the owners. So Katrina, what do you really feel on so many levels? You're a former athlete, you are an executive, you are in the media, you have the role as a Black woman leader. How do you really see athletes taking a role in this conversation around racism, equality, and I think we'll leave it at racism and equality because those are the topics that I feel if we can get those right, other things will cascade from them.
Well, I think thanks for that question. I think the important thing is that when you see us as athletes, you see us as human beings first, and you see us as business people, because each athlete is really their own CEO. They are responsible for their empire that they are building, for their network that they are building, for supporting their families and being the best at their craft. And, in the last decade or so, players have really understood their voice and the strength of their voice on these platforms. Arthur Ashe was one of the first athletes that really used this platform to show to exemplify the humanitarian efforts that he had back in the 60s and the 70s. And he once said that he had to be a champion in order to be able to be heard. If he had never won the US Open in 1968, followed by Wimbledon in 1975, he would not have been respected with his voice and his platform. So when you see the LeBron Jameses speaking out, and you saw Kobe Bryant speaking out, and all these other athletes, Serena Williams speaking out, Colin Kaepernick speaking out, they're using their platforms to just really show reality and the truth of what's happening from their perspectives, from our perspectives, that people are blinded to because all they want to see are these athletes on the court where they can cheer for them on the court, but they won't cheer for them off the court. And is that really fair? That's just like telling the CEO of a corporation, you stay in your lane inside your corporation, but don't come out here and try to tell me anything outside of your business, how I should live or what I should be thinking or responsible for. So I look at a Coco Gauff who's 16 years of age, and the platform that she's taken and the initiative and the leadership that she's shown in the last couple of months regarding Black Lives Matter. I mean, she's our future. We need young players, young athletes like that to understand the importance of their voice and how people will listen to them if we are all fighting for equality, or we're all fighting for it to be seen as human beings and individuals. And it's not just in tennis. I mean, it's not just in sports. It's in business, because guess what? Sports is a business. And when you see the owners and listen to the owners of these teams tell their players to shut up and dribble, really? They're the ones that are selling the tickets for you, that are selling the product for you, that you're making your billions of dollars off of. So if you want them to shut up and go away, then your business goes away. So you need to treat everybody as human beings and as business partners in their respective sports.
One build on that, because you have a global perspective. Fortunately, you've been all over the world with tennis. I know you have an interest in other sports. what do you see happening in terms of athletes outside of the United States responding to the racial inequalities and gender inequalities? Do you have any, has anything really impacted you and given you a real sense of pause?
Well, the pause is a good pause because, unless you have grown up in America, you don't really understand the issue of racial inequities. In other countries, in the UK and in Paris, in France, yes, they have a large Black population, but it's a very different a very different view as to who these people are, and they accept them more than Americans accept us here. And so they've actually been able to sit back and learn and voice their opinions on, this doesn't make any sense. And so the entire world has actually stepped up to support the Black Lives Matter movement and to say this is wrong. And we all have to change in how we are viewing these particular athletes. And so I think the platform obviously now is global in understanding what is needed, why we need to listen, and why we need to embrace all and be more inclusive.
Well, Katrina, I could keep you all day. I know you're a very busy lady. So do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave us with before we turn it over to Meg to close it out?
Well, June, thank you so much for moderating this, and I appreciated all the questions that you put forth, and thank you to all of those that have tuned in today to listen to this, and hopefully you can share the recordings with others. But we as women and who are leaders or aspire to be leaders have to have a bond with each other. We have to reach out and pull the next person forward. It's so important that our voices are heard. It's so important that we are prepared. It's so important that we exude the confidence that we know that we have in order to show that we are the better leaders in our industries, if you will. So thank you for your time. And there's many more anecdotes and a lot more information in my book on the arena.
It's been my significant pleasure. It's just, you've been a delight. And I love to see someone with the youth and energy that you have really bring that to business and command the respect that you obviously garner. So I look forward to more books from you. I'll dive into yours when it's available. And it's really been a pleasure having you today. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you very much.
Meg, would you like to say some parting words?
Yeah, thanks, June. Yeah, thanks, June. First of all, June, thank you for moderating what it was such a terrific conversation. And Katrina, we can't thank you enough for spending time with us here at Quorum. So much of what you said I found extremely inspiring, and things that we talk a lot about at Quorum regularly, since what we're so focused on is how we can be catalytic for change, and you're such an amazing example of that. And so I want to thank you for sharing your story and your time with us. It was so helpful. What resonated with me, and you ended it so beautifully, there were several things that you said throughout, and you actually wrapped it up so beautifully, but I'm going to repeat them because I thought the points were so poignant and important for us. One is, if you're the first or you're leading, both are very important roles. How are you making space for others and bringing people along? And I just think that's such a critical action that all of us in this community certainly can be thinking about and taking. So thank you for sharing that notion, because I think it's really important. I loved when you spoke about raising our voices and owning the space in the room, at the table, and how important that is. And that's something at Quorum we've spent a lot of time talking about. I think that's really critical. The notion of the personal board, I think, struck a chord. You got more questions on it throughout, so that was an obvious There's something amazing about how women relate to each other. And I don't think your board needs to only be women, but there's something very important about part of your board, your personal board, being women that you really trust, that are going to give you a straight story and a straight view. And I know that that's been hugely impactful for me. So I loved that you spoke about that, because I think we all need a village. We all need a village. There's no question about it. And then one of the other things that you said that I thought was so important was the reflection on how often you reflect on how you can make a difference in everything that you do. And I love that notion because you expressed it around how do you use the platform you have. And to your point, all of us have a platform. So how are we all thinking about that, as a collective group? How are we leveraging our platforms to make a difference? That gives me chills, actually, as I say that, because I think it's so utterly critical in this moment and in this incredible fight for equality on so many levels, on the level of race, on the level of gender. How do we make a difference there? So that really resonated with me. So Katrina, we can't thank you enough for sharing all those amazing thoughts with us. To close out, I wanted to say a couple quick things to the group. One is, as Katrina mentioned, the book's coming out. We'll be sharing information with all of you about how you can purchase the book if you're interested. I know I am, so I will be doing that for sure. And Katrina, we wish you tons of luck on that being a massive success. So hopefully we can be a big support for that. The second thing is, Katrina, my guess is that you're very open and available to come speak to groups, whether it's companies or organizations, other organizations that some of our folks might be involved in, to really talk about not only your book, but also a lot of these topics that we covered today. So I wanted to encourage the community to consider that as well, because I think many more people would be inspired and motivated by Katrina's message. So I'll just put that out there like that. I wanted to leave us with a couple actions, because at Quorum we never leave a session without discussing taking action. So that's I named the 4 things that made me pause and think that Katrina talked about. I would challenge all of us to grab one of those concepts and really think about how we're taking those issues up and actually making a difference using our platform to make a difference. It's so important. So I'd love to ask the community to really think about that, reflect, and maybe share with us, share with Diane, things you're working on so that we can inspire each other, to really take action in a time where action is just mission critical for change. So I'd like to leave you with that one thought. I wanted to remind everybody that we have some really great events coming up on the schedule, and Diane's been communicating about them, but I'm just going to highlight a few. On July 8th, we have Maggie Kulik coming back to speak to us about integrating money and meaning. Her first session was fantastic, so that's a not to miss part 2. And even if you didn't make the first one, the second one, you can jump in on the second one. So I encourage you to do so if you can make the time. We have a fireside chat coming up with Janet Thomas, who's one of the leading women in banking and finance in the UK. And she has some really interesting stories to tell us about sort of that what I would call very traditional industry, sort of paving her way through that as a woman and as a Black woman. And so I think she'll you'll all enjoy hearing from her. She actually spoke at one of our How forums several years back, and so we get to meet up with her again a couple years later. So I'm really excited about that. And then we have a discussion coming up on the discussion with Janet Thomas is on July 21st. And then on August 4th, we're going to hear from Marcia Henderson, who is the former Associate Commissioner for Women's Health at the FDA. And she's got a lot of ideas to share with us in terms of the advancement of women in general, women's health overall, things we want to think about related to that. So I think that's going to be a really terrific conversation as well. So mark your calendars for that. Diane is going to be communicating, so just pay attention, because you know Diane's emails really matter. I'm just going to remind you of that. My last little a piece of news is if you are not a digital member of Quorum, we would invite you to join us in this community of amazing women working hard to think about how we can have greater impact in all that we do, and being each other's board of directors. So I think there's something really magical about the community related to that. So that's it for tonight. How about one last huge thank you for Katrina. Thank you so much, and June for such amazing moderating skills. So ladies, thank you. It's fantastic to see all of you, and look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully on July 8th. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Katrina. Great job.